Imagine thousands of men forced to fight to the death just for entertainment. You think they simply accepted their fate? What if I told you the gladiators, these brutal warriors of ancient Rome, were secretly orchestrating a rebellion right under the emperor's nose? What if the greatest battles of the Colosseum weren't the ones fought in the sand, but the ones fought in the shadows? Today, we uncover the hidden acts of defiance that history books never wanted you to know. This is the story of the silent, invisible war waged by the gladiators of Rome. A war not fought with swords, but with whispers, alliances, sabotage, and sheer courage. Welcome to the story Rome tried to bury. For centuries, history has painted gladiators as nothing more than violent pawns, slaves programmed to entertain. But new research, archaeological finds, and forgotten accounts are revealing a shocking truth. They were rebels. They defied Rome in ways so subtle, so intelligent, and so powerful that the empire had to erase their acts from the official records. Because a gladiator who fights is dangerous, sure, but a gladiator who thinks, a gladiator who organizes, a gladiator who inspires others, that is a threat capable of shaking an empire to its core. You've seen the movies. You know the name Spartacus. You know the bloody arena. But what if I told you that the most thrilling battles War and Tea fought under the blazing sun, but in the minds of enslaved warriors plotting their freedom by night? For every famous revolt, like the one Spartacus led, there were dozens of smaller rebellions, all silenced, buried, and forgotten by history. Today, we bring them back to life. To understand their rebellion, you first have to understand how Rome controlled them. It wasn't just with chains and whips. It was with psychology. Gladiators were given just enough glory, fame, good food, and women to keep them loyal, distracted, and hopeful. But most importantly, it kept them afraid of losing the few comforts they had. This was Rome's greatest weapon: hope, expertly mixed with despair. It was psychological warfare at its finest. Gladiators were constantly told, you can earn your freedom, you can be a hero, you can win the crowd, but behind every promise was a threat. Behind every reward was a constant biting reminder of their slavery. Rome perfected mind control long before the term even existed. And yet, even in this tightly controlled environment, within the gladiator schools known as ludi, defiance grew. It started small, a defiant look that lingered too long, a flat-out refusal to salute a trainer, a training duel that went too hard on purpose against a cruel guard, holding a weapon just a second longer than permitted. These were small rebellions, tiny acts of defiance, but they were rebellions all the same, whispers of the storm to come. Many people think Spartacus was a one-off, a freak anomaly. But his revolt was simply the biggest spark from a fire that had been smoldering for decades. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of riot damage in gladiator barracks, hidden tunnels likely dug for escape, and fragmented records of fighters who simply vanished. This is all proof that unrest was not the exception, it was the norm. Everyday insubordination was a constant headache for the trainers. Some gladiators would intentionally lose their weapons during a fight to spare an opponent. Others would tamper with their own gear, making it less effective. Some even refused to perform the dramatic, crowd-pleasing deaths that were expected of them. And in the darkness of the barracks, they would whisper to the new recruits, "Don't trust the masters." Ever these acts might seem small, but taken together, they chipped away at the authority of their Roman captors. Of course, not every escape attempt succeeded. The price of failure was horrifying. Some rebels were crucified right outside their own training school as a warning to others. Some were fed to wild animals in the arena. And some simply disappeared, erased from all records by their masters. But despite the terror, men kept trying. Because as Rome discovered, hope, even a sliver of it, is a very dangerous weapon. Now, imagine trying to plan a rebellion when you're being watched 24/7. How do you communicate? The gladiators developed a covert network. they used subtle hand signals during training, coded taps on the stone walls of their cells, and symbols carved into their training weapons. Messages were hidden in loaves of bread, and vital information was whispered during medical treatments when a doctor was dressing a wound. This was the secret network of the Gladiators, a brotherhood born of shared doom and a desperate desire for freedom. This brotherhood broke down old-world barriers. Thracians, Gauls, Iberians, Syrians, Africans, men from all corners of the empire who might have been enemies on a battlefield were now united as allies. Because shared suffering has a powerful way of uniting people against a common enemy. And their allies weren't just other fighters, they came from all levels of society. Stable boys who overheard conversations, slaves who cleaned the armories, cooks who could pass messages, and even some wealthy Roman patrons who were secretly fascinated by the gladiators' fame and courage. Some of these allies helped pass messages, some helped hide weapons, some bribed guards to look the other way, and some simply spread rumors of revolt to create panic and weaken Roman confidence. This secret war spilled into the arena itself. During the games, gladiators found subtle ways to rebel right in front of thousands of spectators. A fighter might intentionally swing a fraction too slow to give his friend an opening. Two gladiators might avoid killing each other, staging a fight that looked brutal but ended without a fatality. A gladiator might accidentally injure a particularly hated guard during a staged hunt, or they might refuse to give the proper salute to a corrupt official sitting in the stands. The spectators, caught up in the spectacle, never noticed, but the Roman authorities did. Of course, not all gladiators were loyal to the cause. The pressure was immense. Some betrayed their comrades for the promise of freedom or a bag of coin. Some poisoned rivals they saw as a threat. But even betrayal could be turned into a weapon. The masters, paranoid and distrustful, started to see conspiracies everywhere. Chaos breeds opportunity. Sometimes, rebellion wasn't even physical. It was purely symbolic. A raised fist instead of a salute. A refusal to kneel before a magistrate. A defiant stare held just a moment too long. A chant whispered quietly during training, just loud enough for fellow fighters to hear. These tiny gestures might seem meaningless, but to men who had nothing, they were a lifeline. They were sparks of hope for the hopeless. So, did all these small rebellions actually matter? The answer is a resounding yes. Even the smallest, most localized revolts forced the Roman Empire to react. They had to increase the number of guards, strengthen the walls of the ludi, and relocate particularly dangerous gladiators to more secure facilities. They changed the rules of the games, suppressed information, and began monitoring everything from food supplies to visitor access. The gladiators' resistance directly changed how they were managed and treated. So why don't we hear more about these uprisings? Because Roman historians, who were often sponsored by the emperors themselves, had a job to do: protect the image of the empire. They deliberately erased or minimized gladiator rebellions from the official narrative. Why? Because a successful rebel is an inspiration, and inspiration is contagious. Rome feared stories more than it feared swords, but today, through modern archaeology, a closer reading of ancient inscriptions, and new historical research, we can finally piece together the story that Rome tried so desperately to destroy. And what we find is a truth more powerful than any myth. Gladiators were not just fighters. They were not just slaves. They were not just killers. They were men who, in the face of unimaginable cruelty, dared to dream of freedom. And they dared to resist one of the greatest empires the world has ever known. And that is a legacy worth remembering. Thanks for watching. If you found this hidden history as fascinating as I do, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that time forgot. See you in the next one.